Tonight we are doing a belated birthday party for Johnny Frigo. He's only, 87, John?
87?
And on violin and poetry, let's hear it for the legendary Johnny Frigo.
I'm a ham, really. I'm a dilettante. I don't take music seriously. Luckily, I didn't study music too seriously, because if I did, I would have certain constrictions that I was afraid to do something that was not on the paper. I was born on the south side of Chicago. It's called Roseland, Kensington. Well, I was actually born across the street from St. Anthony's Church on 116th in Kensington. So this is the place where I was born, right here. From when I was 3 years old at 11534 Yale Avenue. I was raised here years ago, and they're doing like a story of my life, because now I'm a professional violin player. I was very ignorant about everything that was happening in the world, because I lived on Yale Avenue, which was abutted by Princeton and Harvard. And it wasn't until I went through high school that I realized those were colleges. So you can realize what a different life I led in those days. My mother's name was Lucy Carollo. She was sent to the United States to meet her husband unknown. It was a planned marriage. And when she got here in Wisconsin, she happened to have seen the man that she was supposed to marry and realized that she didn't want to marry him, and met another man who was smitten with her and decided at midnight to elope on a horse and wagon. So the fellow that she eloped with, not the one that they sent her here to marry, is my father, Guerino Frigo. And we call him George, but Guerino is young warrior. So I thought that was a beautiful name. I had the two older brothers, one older sister, and one younger sister. And the only one who is still alive is my younger sister. And I think I'm still alive. We ate sparrows that I killed with a slingshot about at least once a week through most of my youth. That's how poor we were. So I didn't do it just because we had to eat them. I also enjoyed it at that time of my life, which I can't believe I did. The other thing I did when I was very young was collect junk through the alleys, which I sold to the ragman who came by every Saturday saying, "Rags and old iron, rags and old iron." I would get 25 cents at the end of the week for all the junk that I collected. The junk man's son was a violin player, a student himself, and he lived in this home right behind me. So my mother had no idea what a violin even was. But the ragman told her that his son had a small-sized violin and I should take lessons for 25 cents a lesson. The most influential thing was my mother making me practice, and at first I hated the violin. I hated it, and she would cry if I didn't practice. And I studied from when I was 7.5 to 11, and I finally had to give up, mainly because we didn't have the 25 cents a lesson. So that was the last formal lesson I had in my entire life, and the rest was all self-taught. So in grammar school, even though I was playing the violin, they had no orchestra. So I figured, I'm going to go to junior high school and I'll be in the orchestra. That'll be nice. And I got there and there was no orchestra. So the only thing that nobody wanted to play was a tuba. So I was left with the tuba. And then when I got into high school, I bought a $14 trumpet and played trumpet in high school. But I wasn't content with that. So there was an old Italian fellow who had a beat up string bass. So I just started to slap away like this, not knowing what I was doing. Little did I realize that from that moment on, that for the next half century, it ended up that I made 95% of my living playing bass. I had no idea how they heard of me or anything else, but I ended up playing in an orchestra with the band leader was Al Deem, and we played at a club called Club Citro, and it was at Taylor and Halsted. I was singing these songs in this club, and I was like a big shot because I lied about my age, and I was still in high school, but I didn't tell anybody. But I'd go up with my big string bass and try to sing and play at the same time. And a lot of times you'd throw $50 through the F-holes of your bass, you know. Then I'd go home at night and shake the bass, you know, with the coat hanger trying to get the stuff out. But one night somebody put a bill in my bass. I think it was a week later I was talking to them there, and I remember saying, well, I hate it when they I'm glad they put a bill in my bass, but, you know, it's hard to get out of the F-holes. He says, that was Al Capone. I met this trumpet player, Vic Abbs. I joined his group, and I played bass, sang, because we were broadcasting from the glass hat of the Congress Hotel. All the publishers in New York sent us music, and I made all the arrangements, and I loved doing it, never thinking that I should have asked for money. Going through those years, I ended up playing with Chico Marx of the Marx Brothers. My roommate was Mel Torme, who had just got out of high school. Chico Marx really didn't even know how to beat off tempos. He only did his little shtick on the piano. You know, one night he said, hey, Frigo, you know, you got the violin. Come on, you bring the violin and you come down. And I remember his saying, okay, you noodle on the fiddle and I'll spaghetti on the piano. You know, stupid stuff like that. But each show we did, we added to a little shtick like that. Okay. And then World War II broke out, so I was drafted, and I had no idea what to do. They said, you can join the Navy, the Army, the Coast Guard, I said, the Coast Guard, that sounds interesting. So I pictured myself sitting on some shore looking for German submarines or whatever, and instead, I was stationed at Ellis Island, New York, and they heard that I played music, so they put me in the band. And it happened to be a great band with a lot of great players. My roommate was Al Haig, who became a great piano player. Every day was like a little vacation. You get on the ferry, go to Manhattan, and live at the USO, eat all you want, sleep on the couches. But opening night, the formal opening, they had to have a dignitary to open this English USO. So there I was, making $21 a month, and the dignitary that was there was Wallace Simpson, who married the abdicating King of England. I was young, so I ended up dancing with her. I remember dancing with her 2 full dances. Before I went in service, I married a very pretty girl, Dorothy. We had a son called Ricky. Can't tell you how beautiful he was. And then all of a sudden I had to go to the service, so I was away for a couple of years. And I longed for him I was so lonesome for him. I thought I was going to be in the war for another year or who knows. And when I was on this transport ship, the USS Hodges, and when we were going through the Straits of Gibraltar, that's when they dropped the atom bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And the war was over, so we came back. And that's when I joined Jimmy Dorsey's band.
My childhood memories of him are just amazing. I remember my parents were divorced. My mother and father were divorced when I was a year and a half old. But when I reached the age of, I think it was 7 years old, I would go and spend my summers on the road with my dad. But just so many happy memories. He tells a story about St. Louis. He took me to a zoo to see this elephant. I can't remember the elephant's name.
There I am broadcasting with Jimmy Dorsey's band, and while we're broadcasting, at the entrance of the big room, people are dancing, I could see my sister and this little tiny kid that I hadn't seen. That's the first time I saw him in like a year and a half or 2 years. And I wanted to get off the stand and jump, but I couldn't. We were broadcasting. And I remember reading that they had an elephant called Andy. So I said, okay, the next day we're going to go to the park across the street from the Chase Hotel and see Andy. So we go there, we go to the zoo.
And the zoo was closed. And he said, I've been promising my son, he's visiting, he's here on his vacation. And they said, well, I'm sorry, we're moving the elephants to their winter home.
So we forlornly walk out and go down the path toward home. And who was on the path coming toward us? The trainer sitting on top of Andy as he's walking him into some place where they have to take him to another zoo. So I stopped the trainer and I said, please, you don't understand this, but please.
So the trainer got the elephant to kneel down, and they helped me climb. I climbed up on top of the elephant and I sat behind his head.
And this is one of the highlights of my life. I can't believe how happy I was at it.
So just a wonderful childhood. It was a different childhood, but it was wonderful. And he's always been my best buddy.
Jimmy Dorsey's band, we played many, many places, but the last job we played was at the Paramount Theater in New York City. And Jimmy Dorsey told us at that time, he says, after this engagement, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I don't have any good work for you for 2 months. So I said, uh-oh, so what am I going to do now? And I remember having worked with Vic Abs in the Four Californians years before that, at a place called the Stuyvesant Hotel in Buffalo. Oh, I asked Lou Carter, the piano player, and Herb Ellis was the guitarist in Jimmy Dorsey's band, and I was the bass player. And I said, I can get a job with a trio, I bet. He said, okay. So we formed a trio, and we call ourselves the Soft Winds. So we went to the Stuyvesant Hotel and played there for about 3 months. And that became a very, very wonderful trio. I was into songwriting, but had done nothing important. But I had this idea for a song called Detour Ahead. Smooth road, clear day, but why am I the only one traveling this way?
Clear day, but why am I the only one traveling this way? it be so easy? Can there be a detour ahead? Wake up.
I knew nothing about publishing and things like that.
Slow down
I said, any songs we write,
before you crash.
let's split the royalties 3 ways, which is the worst thing I ever could have said, because when I did write Detour Ahead, with Lou Carter's help, I put all 3 names in. And when it goes into ASCAP, usually it's alphabetical, so it ends up being Carter, Ellis, and Frigo. I couldn't do anything about that. I was stuck with that part of it.
Spins around you. Turn back while there's time.
So then, all of a sudden, I'm watching a Lexus commercial during the Winter Olympics in Norway about 7 years ago. And it shows a guy driving a Lexus, and on the passenger seat there's an old Victrola with a big needle going to show how smooth the car runs. And I'm hearing smooth road, clear day, but why am I the only? And it's Billie Holiday singing Detour Ahead. I go, wow, where did that come from?
Am I the only one traveling this way?
From that point on, different jazz people heard that song. And little by little, everybody started doing it. And now it's the quintessential jazz ballad that most artists want to do. When you consider that I was away traveling with all these bands and never coming home to Chicago, and I was lonesome for my roots. So I decided to leave the Soft Winds and come back and start all over again. A whole new generation of musicians grew up that I had to introduce myself to everybody all over again. So I called them and say, my name is Johnny Frigo, and I've been traveling a lot, but I play violin, I play bass, I play tuba. I don't play trumpet well, but I'd like to start working again here in Chicago after the war, so keep me in mind.
Obviously, I played with him for the last 40 years of my life professionally, and I've seen him in all different types of situations where he just fits in perfectly.
And one of the first places I stopped into was a place called Streamliner, because I heard that George Shearing was playing there. And he had known that I was with the Soft Winds, so he invited me to sit in with, because he had a woman singing whose name was Lucy Reed. And she heard me playing, and she said to me, if you could get me a piano player to accompany me and you play bass, that would be great. So it happened that I used to play at the Pump Room in Chicago with Dave LeWinter. I went there, and Dave LeWinter wasn't there, but there was a big husky guy playing piano, a very imposing guy who played great piano, and his name was Dick Marks. On the break, I went up at the musician's room and I said, I have a chance to play with this woman singer, Lucy Reed, on Mondays and Tuesdays. Dick, do you want to play piano? He said, yeah, okay. It was a wino joint then called the Lay Aloha. All these drunks kept hearing this sort of good modern music, and it cleared the place out, By little, musicians heard about it, and by the third or fourth week, the place was mobbed. It was just a wonderful place, and that particular thing could never happen again in this day and age. Then Lucy Reed went to New York, and I started doing commercials. Dick Marks didn't even know what a commercial was, and I gave him his first commercial, and when he got his check, he said, hey, for that little thing I did this is fun. That's all we did. We played commercial after commercial after commercial after commercial. That's how I made my living. Now, I'm sure there were a lot of bass players that were a lot better than I was, and the guys that could play properly with all the correct fingering, and I didn't do that. I just knew what they wanted, and I played. And you can see that every day that I lived at Universal Studios at 40 East Walton. That's how busy I was, just 4 commercials a day. I was first call bass player for 30 years when I was still with Dick Marks, and we were doing all these things with Lucy Reed and stuff like that. This club opened up on Rush Street with Mr. Kelly's. We started Mondays and Tuesdays, and I cannot believe that every 2 weeks they had a singer and a comedian. So it was Barbra Streisand and Woody Allen. The next week, Lenny Bruce. Then Dick Marks went to the West Coast. So I took over the trio, and I added my son on drums.
When I was 17, I started getting hooked on drums. And after I graduated from high school, I said, Dad, do me a favor, just support me for 1 year. I'm going to lock myself in the bedroom with my headphones and my LPs, and I'm going to try and be a professional drummer.
There really hasn't been enough of his recorded work available on a regular basis. Okay, he made a wonderful LP for Mercury back in the late 50s.
They said, we want you to do a record on Mercury. I said, I'm playing bass, my fingers are real stiff, I can't play violin. So they stalled it for a month, and I played scales and things, so I got my fingers more used to the violin from having played bass all the time.
Well, he's a marvelous bass player, but the violin is really, where his heart is.
I hear a lot of violinists, so-called jazz violinists, and many of them, it sounds like more of like a gypsy, whiny sound. And when he plays it, it's like listening to Stan Getz play a great tenor solo or something. It's a whole different sound that he gets that I've never heard from another jazz violinist.
We ended up doing this album, which I thought turned out real nice, and then I forgot about it. So I'm having breakfast when I came back from the Softmans with Don Knapp. And he says, you know about the barn dance and National Barn Dance? It's like the Grand Ole Opry. Did you ever play country music? So I needed a job so badly. I said, you kidding? Sure, I can play country music.
Now the devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bind, and he was way behind, and he was willing to make a deal. When he ran across me one day, son of my fiddle, and I was playing it hot. The devil jumped upon a hickory stump and said, boy, let me tell you what.
So I took my fiddle and went to WLS Studios. They said, do you know any country music? I said, I know a lot of country music. I'll play something. The only song I knew was Turkey in the Straw. So they heard that, and they certainly knew I could play fiddle. So they said, okay. So I was on the National Barn Dance.
But I'll take your bet you're going to regret, because the best that's ever been.
Every other night I was doing all jazz things, studio work, on bass, all bass. And then on Saturday I pick up my fiddle and I go to the 8th Street Theater and we just do country stuff. But I felt right at home playing country music because I'm not like most jazz musicians who put down everything else.
Mama don't know, don't fiddle and done in here. Now John don't care what Mama don't like, gonna play his fiddle anyhow. Step up, John, and show off.
Because I was working at Universal Studios every day doing commercials. Everybody came in, everybody went out. And there's one time the studios were all filled and we were waiting to get on the next session. And there's this real pretty, shapely miss that comes out and she ends up sitting near us. And got talking to her. Her name was Marilyn Brown.
I was a teenager, and I was starting to do commercials at Universal in Chicago. And this very elegant man walked in who looked a little like Henry Mancini, and he was very charming, and I would have to say in retrospect flirtatious, but at the time I didn't really notice that because I thought of him as a sort of an elderly, elegant guy. And when he said his name, I said, "Oh, do you know Ricky Frigo?" He goes, "Oh, damn it, it's my son."
So I said, what is this young, beautiful little girl doing here and wanting to hang around with me? Naturally, I wanted to hang around with her. And her mother saying, well, you don't want to get involved with that old man, do you? And my mother would say, well, you don't want to get involved with that young girl. And I purposely fought off trying to get serious because of the age difference.
Well, it didn't stop anything because obviously I ended up marrying Johnny. He took me under his wing, and I was a wonderful little ballerina, basically ballet, and I sang a little, and I was starting to act, and my career was starting to move along like any young girl in the industry. But when I met Johnny, everything changed because he introduced me to a part of the music industry that was like behind me. It was in the past. He introduced me to the jazz world, to the classics. And he introduced me to poetry, and he introduced me to art. He was like my Svengali.
We always wanted to write these different songs, but naturally I wrote most of it. But she actually helped me write. She had ideas for a certain song. And we did 2 records on Decca Records where she's a star, and just beautiful records. Maybe they sound a little strange. The sound might have been a little too echoey, but they were great records, and we did a lot of unusual songs.
I've done Broadway shows. I've done lots of nightclubs where he was the musical conductor for me. We did very interesting performing, very avant-garde, very artistic, not necessarily that commercial, because he didn't like that, and there was a part of me that was a performer, so we had this interesting blend. But I never stopped learning from him.
And we had Derek Frigo, my young son.
And for Johnny, it was like starting all over again, because he adores his son, Ricky. But he was a young jazz musician on the road at the time when Ricky was a baby. He wasn't able to give him maybe the kind of attention that he was able to give Derek.
He bought me my first guitar. I remember I wanted like a Fender Strat, so he took me to the shop. He paid for a Fender Strat for me, and I was all excited. And then he bought me this real hard-to-play acoustic guitar and said I couldn't have the Fender Strat for a year. And so I took lessons on the acoustic guitar. So that's how he got me over like the learning curve of playing. You know what I mean? That's what gave me the motivation to get the Strat. Otherwise, I probably would have quit.
And he turned out to be a great rock and roll guitar player.
I played with Mick Jagger, and then I had a band called Enough's Enough. It was out of Chicago. You know, and I played with other people like, you know, Cheap Trick, 9 Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, various bands like that. It doesn't matter who I ever played with. People were far more impressed by my dad than they ever were, you know, with me, with what I've done, you know what I'm saying? I can remember lots of incidents like that, you know, bringing Bon Jovi into Toulouse, hearing him play, and he's just like, all night, all he could talk about, I was like, oh my God, dude, your dad, he's amazing, you know?
I've spent my whole life being known as Johnny's son. And I told my dad if I ever make my own CD, I'm going to entitle it, Yeah, I'm Johnny's Kid. And I'm not even going to put my own name on it.
Just hearing him all my life has definitely influenced me tons, just my intonation, my sense of melody, a lot of the riffs that I do that probably separate me from other rock guitar players are probably directly an influence of hearing my dad over the years, you know what I mean?
Out of 100 people knew that I played violin, and I was able to keep up with all the styles. And when the Beatles came in, and all of a sudden, instead of playing upright bass, they're playing electric bass? I said, I'm not going to learn how to play electric bass. I'm already 60 years old or whatever it was. I don't know how.
All of a sudden, everybody wanted the electric bass sound, so he had to learn to do that. And he became really good at it. I mean, he still remained first call on bass all those years.
That was terrible. But I managed to just get by. All of a sudden, disco comes in. And I'm seeing all these young guys that they're whizzes, you know, because they don't know how to read music, but they're doing all the funky stuff, you know. I said, wow, how the hell do they do that?
Stumbling block for him came when that slap sound thing started. I don't even know what you call it, the term for it. But he had a hard time with that, and he kind of thought about maybe just giving up the music business. And then he remembered that his first love was violin. So he took a job, unbeknownst to all the studio players, every morning at the O'Hare Hyatt Hotel, strolling, 5 days a week, and I think he started at 7 in the morning.
He said you play around the tables for all the corporate people that go in there and have breakfast, and then they have their meetings and stuff. But I was still doing commercials at 8 in the morning and things, and playing at Mr. Kelly's at night. But then because I was getting better on the violin, so they'd call me to play in the violin section. After I did that for a while, and I got better and better on violin, I said, I think I could play violin better if I didn't play bass all the time. So I just sort of faded away on the bass, and just started playing violin.
He must have been 64, 65 when he made that complete transition. It's just amazing that a man can, you know, do a U-turn in midstream like that and become a success all over again.
He's a purist. He's the kind of a musician and a human being that would stand on the street corner in Chicago and just take his violin out if someone said, play something.
So one night, I'm playing at the Conrad Hilton, standing on the stairs of the Grand Ballroom. So I said, wait a minute, across the street is a jazz showcase. And this is Monty Alexander, Ray Brown, and Herb Ellis. Oh, I haven't seen them in a long time. So I went there to see them and had my violin with me. So I played a couple of songs with them. They must have liked what I did, because about a month later I get a call and Ray Brown is saying, hey Johnny, we're doing an album for Concord Records in LA, a live records from the Club Loa. And we'd like you to do 1 or 2 tunes on it, on violin. But what happened was, the day I got there, before we opened, there was a big article in the LA Times, almost a quarter of a page with my picture on it, saying, what is this guy playing fiddle who was a bass player all his life? So opening night I played, and my D string broke. So I had to keep playing, you know, and adjusting the intonation as I'm playing. So the next day in the paper, Don Heckman gave me probably one of the best reviews I ever got. The last night we're there, the bartender says, while you were playing, a call came in from the Tonight Show.
Music like keeps him young, you know, is what I think it is, you know. Some people look at playing music as a job or something like that. To him, it's a passion. It's what he loves, you know.
You know, somebody said, the paper said, you've been playing most of your life, but it's only been, what, the last months or something that you became really well known. How come? What?
Well, I guess I wanted to take as long as I could in my life so I wouldn't have time to become a has-been, Johnny.
No, good thinking. Good thinking. That's done. How does that you play the...
You know, when you think someone's life is just about growing to a close, his is just opening.
Well, Johnny Frigo is, without question, one of the great jazz violinists in the history of the music. Can't think of anyone alive who is his equal when it comes to jazz fiddle.
Part of the charm of our playing is the spontaneity of it. We've played so many interesting jobs and have met people from all strata, all levels of musicians and listeners are touched when they hear the music because there's something there for everyone. There's times that we do play things that are kind of esoteric and they wouldn't be listened to as intently unless there may be a couple of gags that set it up and lighten up the air so the people are in a receptive mode.
He has a delightful bandstand manner. He could be a stand-up comedian if he wanted to.
I was so skinny, my pajamas had only one stripe.
He's a very different kind of a man. His thought process is not like yours or mine.
Somebody told me you're also you're a painter.
Yes, I'm an artist.
What kind of stuff do you do?
Well, I do mostly chalks because when I started, when you're on the road, you don't want to carry wet oils on the bus.
Yeah.
So what I would do, I'd get in my shorts and sit in the bathtub and put the easel on the spigots and draw the chalk, knock the chalk down, take my shorts off, take a shower, and wash the chalk down.
His poetry is incredible. I mean, if you've heard him play and know what a brilliant jazz violinist he is, and musician all around, he writes beautiful lyrics. He's written some incredible songs.
I always started off doing just clever little things, you know. Then I got reading poetry books and certain lines just affected me. I know that I'd get, my stomach would go, oh, God, that's beautiful. You know. So I got a little more serious with it. And I write poems about everything, just anything that comes to my mind. But the latest one I have now, is it okay if I just present? Okay, maybe we'll wind it up like this. Living my life in the key of C. No flats, no sharps to fluster me. Afraid to stray from that 5-line staff for the low of a cry, for the high of a laugh. No caffeine rush to spice my talk. I think seatbelt when I walk. Playing it safe's my only goal. I go through life on cruise control. But there was once that other me who drank well of earthly pleasures, heard music of the spheres in never-ending measures, who tasted all life's ecstasies, the bitters and the sweets. But once the heart is broken, how gingerly it beats. So let those black keys gather dust. I'm plain white bread without the crust. Just a pallid melody, living my life in the key of C.
When he was out here, he wrote a song and he dedicated it to me, calling Growing Young with You. And I didn't know about it, and he sang it on the stage. He was with Bucky Pizzarella, this trio, and the place just went out of their mind.
This one lap loop that starts with birth, I've often wondered, was it worth the dicey, pricey entrance fee for what few perks were given me? And then from out of the blue you came, setting my pheromones aflame. You gave my life a sweet reprieve, and now I can't believe I'm growing young with you. I never believed in miracles before, but now I do. My mirror may reflect this same old outer shell you see, but there's a budding tingling of spring inside of me, just itching to be free. Yes, I've had my flings. I've lived the seamy and the steamy yin and yang of things. And when I thought my passion had performed its final song, you came along to prove me wrong. I can't believe I'm growing young with you. Yes, I've had my flings. I never believed I lived the steamy and the steamy yin and yang of things. And when I thought my passion had performed its final song, you came along to prove me wrong. I can't believe I'm growing young with you. Thank you very much. Thank you.